How many things did you have? I have questions about the people of the Tiers.
We all know how to swim, and we all know how to fight. Most Northmen are lucky to make half that boast. What would you like to know?
I'm curious about the people of the Tiers. I think you'll find each of us thinks of themselves a child of Haven, as in my case, or a child of Azure, child of Apex, or what have you. But I suppose we Tiersmen have our shared customs. The most treasured of these customs used to be the pride of being free of Kyros' rule. When were the Tiers settled? Human settlers arrived over 400 years ago, displaced from a war between what are now Kyros' realms of Trevin and Fertile Sands, a flotilla of barely seaworthy rigs, and headed west across the high seas. Tiersmen will sometimes speak of the Five Wives. We use it to refer both to the first 5 settlements where the colonists made landfall, as well as to the 5 matriarchs that went on to form the ruling dynasties of the Tiers. Of course, I'm leaving out the matter of the builders of the old walls. Who knows when they lived here and why they're gone, but those old walls didn't just fall out of the sky. Why don't men own land, or women ships? For centuries it has been our way that the men own the ships but the women own the harbors. Our customs don't truly prevent ownership, they limit inheritance. Lands pass to daughters, then sisters, then mothers and aunts. Ships pass to sons, then brothers, then fathers and uncles. It seems strange to outsides, but makes sense to me. Men are blessed with wanderlust, women with a sense of the permanent. Likewise, the captain of a ship can't pause to carry a child, and the men grow restless if left in place. In truth, the custom varies from place to place, and you'll find men with enough wealth own land, and women with enough sway own ships. As is often the case, the nobles pick and choose their traditions. Why didn't the younger realms stand united against Kyros? Are you trying to rub it in? Yes, the younger realms were defeated one at a time by the invaders. Maybe if I was queen of the Tiers, that wouldn't have happened. Well then, what would Queen Ebb have done? I would have taken the threat seriously the moment troops were stopped marching to the gates of judgment. Am I the only person whose mother mentioned that Kyros was a real threat? Opportunity. That's what killed us. Haven wanted to watch the bastard tier fall first. Apex was hoping Haven would fall. Azure wanted Stalwart to be attacked first. Every realm of the tiers had some interest in watching their neighbors fail first. So we all held back our support until a year or so into the war. Too fucking late by then. Squabbling idiots. Tiersmen live with a greater number of beastmen. What's that like? The beastmen of the tiers are hardier and smarter than their kin elsewhere, and fortunately we have lived together in relative harmony for some time. Make no mistake, life is difficult for most beastmen in the tiers. But compared to, say, how they are treated in the Northern Empire, I would like to think we tiersmen are a bit more modern and forward-thinking, even if just a bit. What of the major resistors to Kyros' rule?
Kyros made swift work of the Tiers, destroying most of the great armies of the Younger Realms in a few short years of war. Of course, queens can be bowed, captains slain, but we are a proud people. I think Kyros will find the stubborn remnants of the Tiers hard to eradicate completely. Was there a particular group you wish to discuss?
Tell me about the Unbroken.
The Unbroken is the name of the military of the now-fallen realm of Stalwart. Every citizen of Stalwart was trained to fight, and all were expected to answer the rallying cry of the Regents, the ruling small council of the realm. A decade ago, Stalwart was the ass end of jokes Tiersmen would tell each other. The people of Stalwart are obnoxiously proud of a long history of being invaded, but never losing. The disfavored put an end to their vaunted record of victory. The Unbroken still persist, albeit marginally so. The disfavored withdrew after the Edict of Storms began shredding the landscape. Their holdfast of Sentinel Stand Keep was never taken, and the citizen army, though scattered, could still be rallied.
Tell me about the Stone Stalker tribe.
Kyros' war was disastrous to the human realm of Azure, but a stroke of good luck for the numerous beastmen that toiled in Azure's endless wheat fields. With the masters all dead, the serfs have been set free. The Stonestalkers are a tribe born from these newly freed beasts. I imagine they would never bow to Kyros or the Archons. Too many generations have been enslaved. I'd wager anything they'll die before they ever bow. Beastmen understand strength and leadership, but it's always in the concrete sense. I can't pretend to know how they think, but I could never imagine them accepting an absent Prima. A distant ruler they can't see or smell seems a bit too abstract.
Tell me about the Bronze Brotherhood.
The Bronze Brotherhood is one of the most feared and famous of the Free City mercenary companies. They serve the highest bidder, and during the war, that was Kyros. Most of the Brotherhood perished in the war, but a handful, the crew hired to work at Lethian's Crossing. They got to babysit the Forge-bound and survived the last few years with minor losses. The band is too small to be a serious threat to the disfavored or the chorus, but they are scourge-worshipping berserks that will adopt any enemy for the right price. Maybe even Kyros.
Are there other remnants of the younger realms that could still rise against Kyros?
Several sages came to our aid during the Second Battle of Vendrian's Well. I at first thought they meant to kill me, but instead they put their lives on the line for us. They spoke of others in their guild braving the Edict of Fire to salvage lore from the burning library. Though I may find them untrustworthy, it must be said that the sages have a certain fearlessness toward the Overlord. Perhaps that could be kindled further.
Having been part of the surrender faction within the school, I'd concur with that point. I thought the Edict of Fire would finally kill their defiant streak. But no, the sages still refuse to bow. We can and should mind their passion.
Historically speaking, an alliance with the School of Ink and Quill is just asking to have your efforts stolen and your goals undermined. Mark my words, some things never change.
Would you rather they be our enemies?
Well, perhaps we can shove them in front of the enemy. And the ones that volunteered at Vendrian's Well weren't all bad.
What can you tell me about the different nations of the Tiers? Before Kyros came, the Tiers were the younger realms, the Bastard Tier, and the Free Cities, in about that order of prominence. We all trace our roots back to the Five Wives, though sometimes a bit ancestral shoreline seems all we have in common. Tell me about the younger realms. Haven, Azure, Apex, and Stalwart have been the four major forces of the Tiers for the last 4 centuries. A few of the dynasties have tried their hand, but all eventually were defeated or absorbed into the 4 we know today. Not sure when the term younger came into fashion, but it's always been a term of humble contrast. Just look at the old walls. Someone was here before us and built them. Don't know really anything about them, but it stands to reason there used to be an older realms that did all the construction. Tell me about the Bastard Tier. It's the northernmost of the tiers and the choke point of the Northern Empire. It's been a hub of trade for centuries, and a long line of merchant families and private armies have kept the realm largely lawless. Though many of us used to joke about the Bastard City being sacked by the rabid dogs, Tudon's capture of the city was a terrible blow to the morale of the tiersmen. We knew that day Kyros was more than just a fun story to scare your kids. What can you tell me about the Free Cities? There is little free about the Free Cities save for their independence from the younger realms. They are not physically adjacent, but rather politically allied by their shared hatred of the other realms. Most of the Free Cities were defeated with little effort by Kyros' forces. Way I heard it, Narat just had to have agents hire up their mercenaries and order them to simply be elsewhere when the enemies of the Overlord arrive.
Ask away.
What can you tell me of the Archons in the Tiers?
Not entirely sure. Which is to say, there was a time I studied my enemy in great detail, but I've recently come to learn that much of my information was little more than lies and misdirection.
What do you know of the voices in Narat? The Archon of Secrets lives up to his name. If he weren't so loathsome at a beast, I'd half admire his mastery of the magical... Try that again. I'd half admire his mastery of the magical arts. They say he knows all the sigils lost to history, but I've also heard it said that all stolen knowledge is why he speaks in his different voices. But in truth, I'm learning that most of what I know is just lies and misdirection, though I'd guess he'd be a poor Archon of Secrets if I had my facts straight. What do you know of Graven Ash? Before the conquest, I assumed Graven Ash a harmless old man, an Archon in name only past his prime. I could not have been more wrong. Many have underestimated the great general by his age. Few of them have made the mistake twice. Ash is a remarkable general. He led his tiny band of disfavored on a nearly unstoppable rampage of the Tears, and he does not seem to win his war with obvious displays of mystic powers, but with old-fashioned leadership and good soldiers. A year or so back, under a blue flag talk with a commander, I was told that the Archon knows the name of every soldier under his command, living and dead. The way the disfavored speak of Ash, you'd think he raised each of them from the cradle. Know anything of Cairn? Enough. She inhales sharply, folding her arms with a scowl. In that case, I won't question further. Thank you. We've better things to do than pick at scabs. What do you know of Siren? I'm sure there may be younger Archons in the historical records, but Siren is certainly an unusually powerful child. It's said half of the Scarlet Chorus was recruited by Siren's persuasive song, and I'd not doubt it. I'd also know the voices of the Narat put a shackle on her power. Probably feared she'd become the favorite of the rabble.
Ask away.
What do you know of arcane society?
I know a great deal of the mages of the Tears, or at least their history. Most are dead now. I know a little less about the guilds sworn to Kyros' Archons, but I try to make an effort to know my opposition.
Tell me of the Earthshakers. The Earthshakers are the disciplines of Cairn, Archon of Stone, and they share their master's command of tremors and soil, and they also share Cairn's aloof, breeding temperament. From what I gather, the Earthshakers serve the disfavored, but the relationship has been deeply strained since by Cairn's fall from grace. I could imagine there's the fear Cairn shared with them something subversive or treasonous. Tell me of Bloodchanters. The Bloodchanters are the voices of Narat's cabal of mages. Their magic is taken from the sigil of Siren, and from techniques stolen from the winds from the school of Wild Wrath, namely their magic of fire as learned from Thousand Embers, Archon of Fire. They barely qualify as a proper school or guild. Most of them barely literate, and, I bet, most of them didn't learn a damn thing. Just had their knowledge shoved into their heads by Narat. They've all the brutal buffoonery of the chorus, but with the magic to make their bloodlust contagious. Their only redeeming feature, guess they make the sages seem not half bad. What can you tell me of the Forge-bound? The Forge-bound have an unusual sort of magic. They specialize in slow, painstaking rituals that do not produce the dazzling blasts of energy and shards of flying ice like my own magic. Instead, their spells render them immune to the fires of the forge and at one with their tools of the trade. I admit a bit of fascination with the guild. I much prefer the power and brutality of my own magic. But if I lived in a calmer, wiser time, I think there could be great satisfaction in using magic to become the master of one's craft. Tell me about the School of Ink and Quill. Behind the Tidecasters, the sages of the School of Ink and Quill are the second oldest arcane institution in the Tears. We go back a ways. There's a lot of bad blood. If I'm being objective, the sages claim to be scholars interested in collecting, archiving, and preserving lore from and for all humanity. They're quite keen to gather lore, but in no sense do they seek to share their knowledge with their Tearsmen. Many of our secrets have been pilfered by sages' spies over the centuries, and we're not alone. The sages have made the secrets of many other guilds. Their generation of theft have made them versatile and dangerous. Tell me about your own guild, the School of Tides. Our patron, Occulted Jade Archon of Tides, is as old as the settlers of the Five Wives, and for nearly 5 centuries we were masters of the coast and the rivers. These days it's a school of one. You're looking at it. She thumps her chest with a bemused smirk. Why didn't your Archon fight in the war? About a year or so before the troops arrived in the Bastard Tier, Occulted Jade proclaimed the age of the Tears was over, and said she'd depart southwest into unknown, unending ocean rather than face Kyros. Most of my guildmates went along, choosing to risk the endless high seas rather than risk a battle. A few of us, the militants as our peaceful brethren dubbed us, chose to stand and fight. To my knowledge, I am the last of those who decided to stay and fight. There was more talk there. What was your school like before the war? There was a time when the Tidecasters were the most powerful guild of the tiers. The Kingdom of Haven accepted us as defenders of a sea trade, and the noble houses gave us peace and quiet in exchange for teaching their sons and daughters music, writing, and navigation. Though the other schools coveted our knowledge, they feared our wrath. Between our destructive magic and our Archon patron, others knew that attacking us meant suicide. How did the school fall? The Archon Cairn issued a challenge, and Masters Folvax, Hagravar, and Cambriel leapt at the chance. I told them it was a hopeless clash. I think they were ready to die. As the youngest Tidecaster still in the tiers, I exercised the better part of valor and went to hiding. But then my sense of shame kicked in, and, well, that's about when I fell in with the Vendrian Guard. Old as the Five Wives. By all accounts, occulted jade was among the initial settlers that made landfall in the tiers before Kyros first cast an edict. Though she's a bit old and stooped, she looked amazing for nearly 500.
I know a great deal of the mages of the tiers, or at least their history. Most are dead now. I know a little less about the guilds sworn to Kyros' Archons, but I try to make an effort to know my opposition.
What of other magical schools and guilds of the tiers? There have been several to crop up and wither across the centuries. The Cutters Guild took their healing magic north centuries ago. The School of Flowering Winter always limped along as an inconsequential group of gardeners. Most other schools in the tiers fizzled out early, slain by suspicious neighbors, or subverted and destroyed by one of the three big schools.
Ask away.
I'd like to ask you about our travel companions. She nods, silently awaiting your follow-up. What do you make of Barrick?
My one concern with Barrick is that he's still loyal to Graven Ash and not to you. Barrick seems steadfast, faithful, and dependable. But if it comes down to you versus Graven Ash, therein lies the test.
She's not wrong. If it weren't a tactical asset, it'd be fun to try and pry him out of that suit. Curious to see if his midsection is as strong, firm, and taut as I imagined it should be. What are your thoughts on Verse?
We should consider ourselves fortunate that one of the most deadly members of the Scarlet Furies considers you a suitable gang leader. That said, I think her involvement with you is entirely suspect. I would wager good money the voices of Neratis listening through her, or perhaps seeing what she sees.
What's your take on Lantry?
Probably the only word thief I haven't wanted to dismember. Him? I'd merely play with an ice knife.
The wandering scholar thing seems an act. It's always an act with the sages, always pretending to know less than they really do. I'm sure he's got 1,000 reasons for why he's not like them, or more trustworthy than the rest. But I know his type, so I don't trust him. Oh, that's high praise coming from you. I'm going to take this staff and repeatedly jab it into your backside until you prolapse. Just like that. Balance is restored to all known existence. You had me worried there.
Ask away. What is it you need?
All right. And why don't we go ahead and talk with Lantry somehow? Not really sure how. Just talk with him directly, I guess.
At least in theory, I'm supposed to be observing history and not getting myself wrapped into it. All the same, this is the thrill of a lifetime. Rarely does one stand so close to monumental moments in the making. You're playing a very dangerous game, or maybe toying with your food. By adopting the Vendrian God, you've bloodied the waters with the chum of hope. I must ask, did you help the Oathbreakers to suit your own plans and whims, or do you genuinely wish to protect them?
Of course, he asks the direct question. How do I truly feel about this? How does John Jeremy truly feel about this as a diplomat? Truthfully, well, I've got Ebb right next to me, so if I don't answer with the first option, she'll probably be mad at me. They didn't ask for this war, and nobody else is going to fight for them if I don't.
And what of their past actions against Kyros? Aren't you worried of guilt by association? We saw what became of Cairn for merely suggesting treachery.
Interesting. Why would you liken my actions to those of Cairn?
The Archon of Stone was said to be cavorting with the locals and suggesting that Kyros' claim to the Tears is invalid. Of course, the locals in question were the Beastman tribes, not regular folk. Not saying you're doing exactly what Cairn did, just worried someone will infer that you're up to something treasonous and need some preemptive justice.
Their past crimes against Kyros. Strike that. Their service to me is an atonement for past transgressions. I will waste no time on talk of bygones.
We long held to the fantasy that someone would rally to our cause, but we assumed it would be our neighbors and cousins that rescued us from extinction. I'd never have guessed salvation would come from the enemy's court.
And we gained minor fear with Ebb because of that? What the hell?
Whatever you do next, consider that many eyes will be upon you, for you have both delivered and taken away the Overlord's edicts, and few will know how to make sense of the latter. You are an exception the Archons cannot afford to ignore. They will likely aim to control or destroy you.
Have you heard of edicts being broken before?
Most of Kyros' edicts were either worded to end in a manner of the Overlord's choosing, or the edicts have simply continued in perpetuity. That's not to say there haven't been stories of broken edicts. They're just uncommon. The oldest is, I think, Golbraith and the Edict of Sorrows, and that tale dates back to around the year 110. Aside from you, the most recent was the Edict of Twisting Grasses, back in 380. In all these stories, Kyros' edict very clearly gives its victim a single way to escape, and someone manages it. What's never happened is the pure abatement of an edict, like using a spell of warding or cancellation.
Have a moment. Let's talk further. So what's on your mind? Did you want to discuss matters of the present, or would you prefer a more scholarly rant? Let's discuss current matters.
Of course. How can I help?
Know anything of the region we're in?
The Spires predate us all. As far as I know, we're the only ones who've been up here since... ever? I think this might be a first. Perhaps the real Trailblazer had trouble getting down and was lost to history. Of course. How can I help?
What are your thoughts on our traveling associates?
Are you asking for an objective assessment? Or is this your way of saying you want to gossip?
Barrack, what do you make of him?
You must have some leverage over him, as I would have thought he'd lead us into a disfavored trap long ago. Or maybe the Legion is just that polite? I must admit, I am completely fascinated by his predicament. Ever tried diagramming the articulations of his armor? Don't. It'll only lead to madness and ruination.
Thoughts on verse?
I know little of swordplay, and couldn't work a curve and arrow to save my life. I can't really comment on the lady.
Lady? You're just afraid to talk in front of me, clear as day. Your sweat is easier to read than your ink scribbles.
What? No, not at all. I just don't know how to comment on a warrior's worth, that's all.
Spare me your blather.
Verse pauses to read Lantry's body language.
Huh. Think that, do you? Didn't know you had such swollen hope for me.
Verse, explain yourself.
Just calling it as I see it? And I see he's holding back. Nothing serious, just a bit insulting.
No need to keep secrets, Lantry.
A most fascinating specimen. I think she has great potential. A dangerous amount of potential, to be blunt. The Scarlet Furies are the fighting elite of the Scarlet Chorus, and that means floating to the top of a sea of blood and chum. We should consider ourselves lucky to have her on our side, with her weapons usually pointed away from us.
What do you make of Ebb?
Good tidecasters stay underwater. Kyros did the Tears a favor by erasing those moon howlers from history. A shame one of them escaped justice.
I like that I make you this agitated. Considering all the things that don't seem to bother you in the slightest. I'm not gonna lie. I'm kind of getting off on how much power you're giving me here.
Ugh. And then there's your coquettish act whenever someone calls you on your teeth. I'll be the one ready to tangle when, not if, you decide to pounce.
Interesting. Let's speak of something else. I have some questions for you.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I'd like to know more about you. Me? Well, fine. But I'm not a very fascinating subject. I study interesting people, enough to know I'm not one of them. What's your story? Tell me the origins of Lantry. Someday, someone half your age will ask you to sum up your life and you'll realize what an odious request that is. Well, where to start? I grew up in Sunder. I was born right after independence from the realm of Stalwart. So yeah, do the math and you'll realize I'm old. In a treaty that ended with the firm stipulation that Sunder chose to leave and that Stalwart did not lose a civil war, the Free City of Sunder marks 347 TR as its year of independence. He's pretty spry for 84. My parents were harbor hands, and my mother never returned from a voyage, and my father lost his hand to infection and decided to sell me to the School of Ink and Quills. Any other family? Irrelevant. If they exist, they are strangers. Family ties are severed when joining with the sages, at least in principle. The school has had its share of favoritism for blood relatives. As a novice, I was assigned to the Dove Cotes, where I learned how to raise and groom birds, to carry missives, and most of my early tomes are on that subject. 10 years and several tomes later, someone decided I was ready to be welcomed into the inner circle and shown the ways of magic. And since then, I've spent a great deal of time in field study, which I supposed readied me for life after the fall of the Vellum Citadel. Well, as much as anything could be ready for one of the strangeness of these days. Were you born Landry, or did you take that name up on joining the School of Ink and Quill? Most sages take a new name when they join the school, but for me, the transition was difficult at first. I stuck to my old commoner name and then just never got around to picking some highfalutin name like Sage Apophysis or Sage Dangling Participle. Is this your true skein? Did you always want to be a sage? I cannot imagine doing anything different. I suppose in my youngest days I yearned for battle and glory like most boys I knew. Having now seen how short a soldier's life can be, I look back on that old calling, that old mindset, and laugh. So really, what's your story? What do you mean by that? I know you're smarter than you act. Extend me the same courtesy. Lantry strokes his beard, leaving flecks of sepia among his white whiskers. I was on the take from the voices of Narat, or at least an agent of his sent me to the School of Ink and Quill 30 years back. It'd be years later until I made the connection to the Archon. Most people think the war began 3 years ago, but the voices of Narat had his hands in things sooner than that. I was part of that early invasion. An eager kid, happy to accept a 30-year assignment that comes with an education. Ho! Ho! Thank you for telling me. Now, No more secrets. Understood? I will endeavor to earn your trust as best I can. Sorry to have given you reason for doubt. What else aren't you telling me? You read the Edict of Fire. You were the messenger of Kyros' judgment on my work. It was about then that I decided that I needed to take an interest in your skein. In truth, I am deeply curious about any who have lived as vessels to Kyros' most supreme magic. When I heard you were proclaiming a second edict, I had to find a way for us to meet. Being tied up in a prisoner camp was not the intended plan. So you advocating surrender to Kyros was the end of your long plan? Yes and no. When I first left, I was just happy to be getting educated by the sages on someone else's rings, and my orders were simply to listen and report. As the time drew near, my orders were to win them over, a little at a time, to the notion of surrender. But I failed. The elders of the school grew defiant, and the militant minds won out. These are Tiersmen, after all. I didn't deliver the surrender, and it took the Overlord's edict to end what I was sent to do. Most interesting. Lantry was a spy. He was a servant to the Archon of Secrets. Funny, Ebb thought that Verse would be the one who was the spy, but it turns out Lantry was. You mentioned raising birds earlier. Think you'll go back to doing that? At some point, yes. Good birds are needed to keep the missives moving through the tiers. I set all my best birds to flight before the edict. Turn of phrase, constant call, and the rest. They're out there somewhere, and maybe when this is over, I'll summon them back and start a new dovecote. How do you feel about Kyros? How can I not help but find him to be the most captivating person alive? The man has been empires, claimed continents. Where he goes, history follows. I won't deny he has killed millions, at least. But I contend more would have died in petty wars across Tyranny in the void of Kyros. I have seen what tiny despots, merchant cabals, and mage guilds can inflict in the names of all sorts of righteous causes. I will take the rule of Kyros over the tyranny of every idiot on Tyranny.
One moment, my friend. Just let me finish this thought.
Ending his note with a flourish, Lantry licks the tip of his quill, pausing to taste it a second and third time before tucking the pen in a holster on his sleeve.
I am nothing if not a semi-reliable font of knowledge. What did you want to discuss?
I'd like to discuss arcane matters.
And I'd be happy to oblige. Ever since the fall of the Vellum Citadel, it is hard to find someone with whom I can discuss such things.
What do you know of Kyros' edicts? Kyros has cast many of the ages, and to my knowledge has never worded two edicts exactly the same. Edicts defy our understanding of magic. Kyros' magic works over vast distances, over indefinite durations, and no archon or mere mage can counter the force of an edict. What can you tell of edicts in general? I explain it to my students like this. A spell is to an edict as a drop of rain is to a hurricane. Edicts and spells are both magical cantrips, but differ in intensity by orders of magnitude. Edicts are almost commands to Tyranny that must be carried out until the instructions allow for the magic to end. If Kyros wants a plague until next Judge's Day, expect copious bobos until next Judge's Day. Nothing has ever dispelled an edict. Nothing outside of the edict's own sunset clause, as I like to think of them. I'm curious about a specific edict. Of course. Ask away. Any thoughts on the Edict of Execution cast on the Vendrian's Valley? It seems like the Archons were about to kill each other, and the threat of mutual destruction was about all Kyros had left. I imagine fear is the only way to get someone like the Voices of Nerat to follow orders, and the Edict certainly did whip them into action. What do you know about the Edict of Stone? The Edict of Stone ravaged the realm of Azure. The upheaval of earth and rock turned the rolling plains into a craggy steppe known as the Stone Sea. Since the edict was directed at the traitorous Archon of Stone, it would seem the upheaval of Azure was a secondary consequence, though I imagine little of what Kyros does is unintentional. What do you know of the Edict of Fire? I know that you warned us. I'm alive today because of you, as are so many of my brothers and sisters, and I'm most certain you were not ordered to warn us, so all the more reason to honor your decision. Lantry bows deeply, his face blushing when he returns to standing. Given the destruction involved, a warning seemed the humane thing to do. A most noble sentiment. The edict had its intended effect. It crushed the will of the school and scattered the sages to the wind. I'm glad it brought an end to the conflict, and, thanks to your warning, without further losses of life. Can you tell me of the Edict of Storms? The Edict of Storms turned the once forested lands of Stalwart into a windswept wasteland. They call it the Blade Grave now, since only the iron and bronze armaments remain. Hurricane breezes, rust winds, and relentless lightning have destroyed the housing and farmlands. Hey everyone, J Squared John Jeremy here, and I want to thank you for watching. Check out another video from yours truly, or take a look at the playlist for this series. If you haven't done so already, click on the logo to subscribe and keep track of this channel. Until next time, so long, and take care.